Mr. Rohit Vyas, welcome to ITV Gold. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you.
I have to have you here because there's so much happening, so let's go right into it. My first question to you has to be about Afghanistan. I have multiple questions on Afghanistan, so let me ask for the first question. We are 1 week away from full withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. We're hearing the news that the president wants to stick to this deadline. He does not want to extend it. The Taliban has said no to the extension of this deadline on August 31st. How are you looking at this? Should U.S. be staying there longer?
They might have to if a lot of people are not evacuated. I think the plan was always to get everybody out of there, including the 6,000 or so troops, combat soldiers who are there carrying out this evacuation mission. So October 31st is the deadline. They're going to stick by it, but what I'm a little disturbed about in this whole thing is that the Taliban seem to have had the upper hand. They're dictating to the Americans, to our soldiers, what to do, to our troops. They're telling us, you better stick to this deadline or else. And I don't think I like that kind of a threat hanging over the United States. I think it should be us telling them, look, we'll get out. We've made a commitment, but we'll get out when we get everybody, including our Afghan allies, out safely. I think that should be the tone we should be adopting against the Taliban. We can't let the Taliban push us around. So it's a tough call for the President of the United States. This has been in the making already under the previous administration. There was a commitment to withdraw all our forces and get all our allies out. But the disturbing news today also has been, and it's just in the past couple of hours that it's been confirmed, is that the Taliban have said they will no longer allow any Afghans to take any of the roads to Kabul airport. That is very distressing news, very disturbing news. That means so many of our allies who have helped U.S. Defense Forces during these 20 years will not be able to get out, and God alone knows what's going to happen to them and what kind of threats the Taliban will carry out against them. So it's a very disturbing situation right now.
I believe I read the news in which the Taliban has sentenced somebody to death already for their help to the U.S. military.
Yes, apparently a couple of interpreters or whatever already have received letters that they have been sentenced to death. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So let me ask you this question. We have about 5,000 people waiting at the Kabul airport, and then there are thousands of people waiting outside the Kabul airport. I want to know why these evacuation plans weren't made better. Why are we having such a huge crisis right now to pull out the people from Afghanistan? Why was this not planned better?
Yeah, I guess, to answer your question in the best possible manner, it's because the administration made a deal with the Taliban. They knew the Taliban were going to take over anyway, and they had to make a deal with the Taliban because those are the people who will be controlling everything. They control the majority of the country very swiftly as soon as the withdrawal was announced, and now they control Kabul itself, except for the airport. So it's a very difficult kind of thing to maneuver around, because once the Taliban are in the city precincts of Kabul, it's pretty much they who dictate who gets to go to the airport. Now, there was a deal, we all understand. There were secret negotiations that went on. The G7 nations were a part of this. I knew about it. We were briefed about it. And in fact, our allied forces have been there. Also, British troops particularly have been there to help in this whole evacuation effort. Why it wasn't carried out better is anyone's guess. My best guess is that it was too much dependent on what the Taliban wanted, how they wanted this carried out. And we had to do what we had to do because we had to protect our own soldiers as well. And I think that's the main reason that President Biden is sticking to this August 31st deadline, at least for the moment. It's because the Taliban have drawn a red line there and said, we don't want you there after the 31st of August. Now, if the United States tries to stay there, try to make things smoother, because things have not been going that well, but apparently it has been now, but haven't been going on that well so far, then the question is, do you want to endanger our own troops over there? They would be in real danger themselves.
Right. But the Taliban, and everybody kind of agrees with this, has bred terrorism. And it's about 75,000 of them in Afghanistan right now. How does it make sense for a country like the United States to negotiate with, which is primarily a terrorist organization? That doesn't make any sense to a lot of people. How are you looking at that?
Well, it's either you negotiate with whoever is there and has taken over. You see, the Afghan government, don't forget, collapsed. It
Correct.
imploded basically. The Afghan troops were trained by the Americans, but they just gave up. They gave up, and nobody expected them to give up as quickly as they did. The president Ashraf Ghani decamped. He fled the country himself. So you've basically left the city of Kabul, the capital, headless, with nobody in charge. So what happened? The Taliban walked in. Now, who do you negotiate with when you want to withdraw and get your troops out of there, as the commitment was made by two administrations now, the Trump administration and this administration? Now, what do? You negotiate with whoever is in power to the best of your ability. And that's what the United States has done, talking to whoever is in power. The irony is, there were reports also of the CIA director meeting yesterday secretly with the current head of the Taliban, and he was in U.S. captivity for the longest time. He was imprisoned by the United States because of terrorism, exactly what you mentioned. The Taliban, yes, they do foment and foster terrorism. They talk about an extreme form of Sharia rule going back to medieval times. I mean, none of it is a happy picture, but you still have to negotiate with whoever is there to the best of your ability to make sure that all your own citizens, the United States citizens, citizens of your allied countries that have been a part of this with you, and Afghans who have helped this whole mission for 20 years are out of there as safely as possible.
This Afghan military, which you just suggested to right now, which has collapsed, had hundreds and thousands of soldiers that have been trained by the U.S. Troops in Afghanistan, and for the last 20 years have been working kind of with them. I fail to understand how an army which outnumbered the 75,000 people of the Taliban just collapsed. What does the Taliban have on them, which is so scary that all of these military personnel just gave up?
That's an impossible question for anyone to answer, I'm afraid. I don't think even the best intelligence sources would be able to figure that one out. But for the soldiers to just cave in and give up, and then, in fact, they discarded their military clothing and got into civilian outfits and disappeared. Now, there's one light at the end of the tunnel in all of this, and that's in the Panjshir Valley. Ahmad Massoud, who is the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was known as the Lion of Panjshir at the time, the province of Panjshir. He has said that he's going to resist the Taliban. He'd like to negotiate with them, but he wants to resist the Taliban. He's not going to allow them to just walk in and take over the Panjshir Valley, which is what the Taliban have said they're doing right now. But they have not yet apparently penetrated that area. Ahmad Shah Massoud has been able to rally, according to reports coming in from that area, which is very difficult to reach, by the way. Reports coming in from that area suggest that many of the soldiers who gave up in Kabul are there now. And maybe under the strong leadership or the perceived strong leadership of Ahmad Massoud, might then begin to rally together and put up a strong resistance. That's what's coming out of there. Reports are coming out of there now. Those forces, Ahmad Massoud's forces, used to be anti-Soviet at one time when the Soviets were in that country. So they resisted that movement at the time, that invasion at the time. And so these people have said now that they will resist any incursions by the Taliban. But they've also said they're willing to negotiate with the Taliban. So everybody is suggesting negotiating with the Taliban because they now control the majority of the country. There are these pockets where warlords are there, independent warlords, and it depends how things move forward, whether those warlords are going to unite, come together, which has happened in the past, but they have not been able to so far marshal up enough strength to effectively resist a Taliban incursion.
Are these countries getting scared of the Taliban, according to you?
Which countries?
The countries that are part of this, the U.S. and other G7 countries that have people.
No, I don't think anybody is. No, I don't think anybody's scared of the Taliban or anything like that. You realize when you've gone through a military, episode, I'll call it. Once you've been through a military episode, if you believe it's a hopeless case, then you want to pull out. There was a mission. The United States had a singular mission when it went in there, and that was to take out Osama bin Laden, because it was Al Qaeda, which was given shelter by Taliban, that had supported Osama bin Laden. The attacks against the United States, the terrorist attacks of September 11th were engineered from within Afghanistan with the protection of the then Taliban regime. And so it was very clear for the United States, take out the enemy, take out the terrorists who brought terrorism to American soil. That mission has been accomplished. It was never a long-term mission for the United States to just stay there and rule that country or anything like that. It was to make it as stable as possible. And as I've explained to your viewers before, over centuries, there have been movements to get into Afghanistan and to bring about some kind of order. And almost none of it really worked, going back to Alexander the Great and many other empires that sought to go in there and to bring about some kind of discipline that they thought would be the right one. It never really worked. The Soviets, before the United States, the Soviets were there. It didn't work. And so I think for the United States, it made perfect sense and still makes perfect sense not to be there any longer, because it's going to be endless. You're going to be losing troops for generations. And that's not a situation we want to be in.
But it seems like the Taliban is quickly changing how it's looking at everything. I mean, they want to stop Afghans from leaving the country already. Women are so scared over there. People are getting death sentences. I mean, what will happen in Afghanistan at this point?
They're not changing. They're doing exactly what they're known to have done and be doing, and they're going to be doing this. This is what they're doing. This is probably a new generation of Taliban leaders, by the way, and fighters.
Right.
Okay. Because 20 years ago, there was a whole different set. There are many of them still there, but they must be the elders by now. I'm just guessing. And so this is a new generation of Taliban. They could probably be much more ruthless and brutal. And we've seen some video coming out of there, which has shown them beating up folks, including journalists. There are reports that a Reuters journalist has been killed, actually, a Reuters photographer. There's one report that came out that a Reuters photographer was killed by the Taliban. And so we can expect a lot of brutality, a lot of ruthlessness. And unfortunately, it's going to have to be that country that sorts this out itself. And if that means there are pockets of warlords fighting them individually, and then perhaps uniting somehow, and then taking on the Taliban, it's a whole different ballgame in that country. The question is then, even if the Taliban are taken out, who rules? What happens? What kind of ruler will be there? What kind of leadership will be there, if at all? Will it be anything that the West can relate to? Will it be anything that even the Soviet, even Russia or China can relate to? We don't know. We just don't know.
Let me ask you this question. Does the threat of global terrorism increase with the Taliban taking over Afghanistan? What are your personal comments as a political commentator on that?
I hope it doesn't increase, but it may well increase. If they have sheltered Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda in the past, what's to say they'll stop doing so in the future?
Right.
And that remains to be seen now. I think the United States and its allies are going to have to stay very strongly vigilant against any such maneuvers. Intelligence, I think we have a good intelligence capability, and I think we'll be able to monitor and see what's going on within the country, actually, and in its periphery. There will be other nations that will also be looking to either exploit the situation there in Afghanistan for their own benefit, for their mutual benefit with Afghanistan. And there will be nations that will be watching very warily, as we will be watching very, very warily. But the fact is, we had to get out. We've gotten out. And hopefully there won't be any terrorism that is emanating from there. Speaking of terrorism, a lot of terrorism has now become, local in many countries. All of a sudden, it's homegrown and that type of thing. So you now have a global situation where you'll have your own local terrorists or those inclined toward terrorism tying up with other links around the world in this sort of syndicate, global syndicate. And that's my fear. That's my biggest fear, is all of us as nations, as free democratic nations, will have to work together to make sure our intelligence is on top of these situations.
Yeah, there's an influx of Afghan refugees across the world right now. I know the U.S. is trying to help get a lot of them, and other countries are doing that. So we'll continue to follow up the story. I have to move on with my questions. I'd like to discuss now the COVID crisis that is happening in the nation. It continues. Some of the governors still are banning mask mandates, even though they are reaching the highest hospitalization rates and full capacity ICU beds in their states. How should we be handling this? And, what does this show about U.S. politics, according to you?
First of all, the good news was that there has been finally official approval of the Pfizer
Right.
mRNA vaccine, which is good. Now we should be able to convince more people to get vaccinated, because until there's a formal approval of something, right now it was working under emergency use authorization (EUA), which simply means it's been used because there's an emergency. But whether it's been checked, vetted, if you will, checked for any kind of side effects that could be widespread, etc. That's happened now with Pfizer, and I'm expecting Moderna will follow very soon. Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci has warned that this pandemic is not going to be under control well into spring of next year, 2022. Bad news. Bad news for the administration as well, bad news for all of us. And he has attributed this largely to the majority who have not got vaccinated. And the hope is that with this final approval of Pfizer's vaccine, that at least more people will start to go out there and get vaccinated. Dr. Fauci has also warned that unless we get an overwhelming majority of people vaccinated, we may not be able to get a handle on this pandemic. Now, that's what I understand he has said, and that's how I'm reading this. That's ominous, that is scary. So we better hope and pray that a lot of people who have not been vaccinated now are convinced and start to get vaccinated. Because what's happening in the States, as you're mentioning, is frightening. A lot of the southern states, the emergency rooms are completely overwhelmed. There are no ICU beds left. They've already started calling in for makeshift morgues, mobile morgues, which again takes us back to early 2020 when people were dying by the hundreds and then by the thousands. We saw that in New York City. We saw it in many other states. And again, we're seeing repetition of this mainly now in the South, because those are the states that have been resisting. I'm expecting more trouble coming up as the fall school season begins. And we're going to see a lot of resistance between school authorities and their governments. Already in Florida, we've seen some superintendents of schools, school boards have taken their own decisions to enforce a mask mandate. The governor has said if they do, he's going to start fining those counties where this is happening. So it's going to be a mess. It's a big, big mess. And yes, politics is playing a major role in this.
You know, and talking about Florida, just on the whole school issue, about 30,000 people are currently quarantining or have been given a stay-at-home order in Florida's largest school districts. I mean, this is a really scary situation. How can this impact all of us in the coming months?
It's going to impact everybody very, very widespread. It's going to be extremely dangerous because there is a no mask mandate on the other, and in those states where there is a no mask mandate, things are so serious and the virus is spreading. And it's killing not just seniors anymore.
Right.
It's killing young people. It's killing children. That should be a wake-up call. Just today, I saw an interview with a mother who lost her 32-year-old daughter, and she was crying on television, begging everyone, please get vaccinated. There was a conservative talk show host from the South who died just a couple of days ago. He had been hospitalized, he had been hospitalized for months now, and he was an anti-vaxxer. He kept on going out there saying there's no need for the vaccine, it's a hoax and the rest of it. And now his own family says if he could do it all over again, he'd be begging people to get vaccinated. It's a cry for help. It's a very serious situation, but I am also seeing it in my own state of New Jersey, where I am right now. That you have signs outside, convenience stores, outside delis, outside restaurants, saying the CDC now suggests that you wear a mask when you're going indoors, unless you're consuming food or drinking directly. You wear a mask while indoors, whether you're vaccinated or not. I've seen people disregarded here now in my state. They just don't care. And it's scary. And the last thing we need to see is a breakthrough of COVID. That's COVID starting to affect all of us who are vaccinated. Reverend Jesse Jackson and his wife, both of them had the Pfizer vaccine. 2 doses of it. They were supposedly immunized, both down with COVID. Now, can you imagine if this virus starts to mutate because of those who are refusing to get vaccinated? Then it makes the whole fight against the pandemic futile.
Right. And to make, again, masks and vaccines a political issue makes absolute no sense to me, personally speaking. And I'm sure it doesn't make sense to a lot of other people. My final question to you, actually, I'd like to discuss quickly, while I still have you with us. Kathy Hochul, she's become the 57th governor of New York. Unfortunately, this comes as Governor Andrew Cuomo has resigned. She says that she wants people to have faith in the government again. That's her biggest motive. I'd like to know, what do you think she's inheriting at this point? And, how do you think she needs to function as the governor, as being the first woman governor of the New York state?
I think she'll do pretty well. She's got a stellar record. She's been in public service all her life, her career, and she's very capable. I've had the privilege of interviewing her actually. A few years ago, I interviewed her in Manhattan, and she seemed like a very stable, very capable administrator herself. I even posed a question to her at that time of would she ever be governor, and she, of course, didn't answer because she was then the lieutenant governor under Andrew Cuomo. But I think it's New York State can look forward to lots of stability now, unless people try to question, and there are some within the legislature there in New York State, in Albany, who would like to question how much she knew about what was going on with Governor Cuomo in most of these harassment instances. She probably had nothing to do with any of it. I'm pretty convinced of that. She's not one of those women who would turn a blind eye to something. If she saw or heard something, she would speak out. And I think what you can look forward to in the state of New York now is some stability after this huge scandal. And I think she's perfectly capable of running the state.
What is the future for Andrew Cuomo?
Hard to say. He's going to try getting back into politics again, in my view. He's going to continue to deny all the allegations against him, as he has been doing. But in the end, maybe if he doesn't get to go back to public life and people don't forget it and keep it in their distant memory, he'll be on television. You can bet he'll be back on television. He'll be out on television as some kind of expert talking about politics and all the rest of it. So I don't think he's going to fade as quickly as that. He comes from a family which has been involved in public service. His father, Mario Cuomo, was the governor of New York himself, a brilliant man, a brilliant lawyer before that, and somebody who was actually extremely capable. And lots of people had lots of hopes in Andrew Cuomo, but that apparently hasn't worked out. So I don't think he'll fade out. I think he's going to try making another bid to come back. It'll then be dependent upon the people of New York. And if he goes for higher office, or he tries to go for higher office, it'll depend on the people of the United States to see, if someone like him should come back into the public limelight.
Yeah, well, quite an interesting perspective on that. Thank you so much for your time today on ITV Gold.
Thank you very much for having me on.